Something is the issue. Now, what this person then brings up, and here's where it starts to get really cool, is understanding the timing of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. We have to understand the way that God counted days and what was going on in Jerusalem at that time. And we've already said God doesn't start a day at midnight. That was something that mankind came up with. It starts when the sun goes down. That's the beginning of the day. And okay, that's fine. We understand that the way the Jews are going to be counting it. But where things start to really open up is, and we'll have to turn here too. So my apologies for all of these verses, but this is a teaching, not a sermon. Turn to Leviticus 23. And again, God is going to let us know how we're supposed to be keeping these Sabbaths that he brings up, these days he tells us. And look in verse 32, 23:32. You are to observe the day from what to what? Do you see it? Did I give you the right reference?
Evening to evening.
From evening to evening. You shall afflict your soul in the 9th day of the month at evening. From even to even shall you celebrate your Sabbath. In other words, from sunset to sunset, when the sun went down, evening began. Now, we've already talked about Nicodemus coming and Joseph of Arimathea, and we look in John. Now let's turn back to John. John 19:31. Again, we looked at this a while ago. The Jews, therefore, because it was a preparation, and they didn't want anybody on the cross on the Sabbath day. Why? That Sabbath day was a high day. Sought Pilate that their legs might be broken. And here is where it gets cool. Are you ready? There are two different kinds of Sabbaths that God talks about. And this is what's going on. And the writer would have just gone, well, I'm writing to a bunch of Jews. And when I say the word Sabbath, when we say the word Sabbath, we go, oh, seventh day. And but you look in Scripture and God will say, here's this day, this shall be a Sabbath to you, and it's not on the seventh day. A Shabbat, okay? And this is where the confusion and what's going on, because in the day are the spring feasts, okay? What's the first one? First feast. It's Pesach. Passover. Passover, the first one. It's a day unto itself, but attached to. When you read it, he says, here's this day, and then you will celebrate for a week the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so there is the Sabbath, and then there are these other 7 days. And in that seventh day, see, the Feast of Unleavened Bread was not this high Sabbath. It was part of it. But the way that this works is we've got a Shabbat, a Sabbath, but then we've got another Sabbath. So we'll see as we go along. By the way, if we knew exactly the date, the year that Jesus died, and if it would have been 31 AD, we don't know. This person writing this kind of makes that big leap. But you kind of go, well, okay. If it is that day, this answers every question. If it's that year, it answers every question. All the math works out. It's amazing as we go along. Mr. Davis, do you have anything to add in here? Okay. As we know, there was a preparation day in which they got ready for the Sabbath coming. But Christ was crucified, his body placed in the tomb, was the day immediately preceding a Sabbath. And so in this case, the Passover was celebrated. Jesus did the Passover that night. He was crucified, had to be, on Passover. And, I looked up again. I've looked it up before. I'll let you look it up some other time. But how they choose what day is Easter. You ever notice that Easter doesn't coincide with the Passover? Again, it's one of those things is, in case you haven't noticed, we hate the Jews. And it's like the enemy just hates anything that's going to be associated with the Jews. And so he changes it all around. This person points out the normal weekly Sabbath day would fall on the seventh day of the week, and quickly puts in here, not to be confused with Sunday, which is the first day of the week. There are 7 annual Sabbaths day. This is the way it puts it in the Bible, listed in Leviticus chapter 23. So we've got, we'll call it 51 or 52 Sabbaths in a year, except that God has come along in Leviticus 23 and says, here are the days in these particular months in which my other high holy day Sabbaths fall. Okay? And they can fall whenever. They may fall on a Sabbath. They may fall on another Sabbath. But I love the way this person puts this. Because traditional Christianity long ago abandoned these biblical annual Sabbath days, as well as the weekly Sabbath. I don't know who this is, but we'd probably have a good time. For many centuries, people have failed to recognize that the Gospels plainly tell us that when Jesus Christ was crucified and resurrected, and why Good Friday, Easter Sunday never happened that way. Most people fail to note why. There's another reason. Why did it have to be the first day of the week? I mean, the church is going to bring that up. Why? Good man. Somebody gave him a high five, not across the face the way we normally do, but that's exactly right. It's got to be. Why? It's Son's Day. That's exactly right. Constantine never, as far as I know, fully gave up sun worship. He didn't do it. He didn't do it. And of course, we know the Catholic Church, once it got established, the way it would go into a place would say, look, we're here to, and by the way, the Roman army is behind us, but don't let that worry you. But we're here to teach you a new religion. A new religion, we've got so many gods. Look, you can have those gods. This is what they would tell them. You can have those gods. It's just Jesus gets to be number one. And you play ball with us and everything will be all right. And so we have, as if you've noticed at all, Catholicism in a lot of places around the world has a lot of pagan worship in it. And you can see it with the things they do. And you go, what is that about? That's why, because it was engrafted in. They just let Jesus be the God above all the other gods. But you can keep all the other ones. So anyway, moving right along. We've already read from John 19:31 where it says that Sabbath was a high day, and the reason that it says that is to differentiate it between just the regular Sabbath that you have every 7, and say this was a high day. And so what was this high day? Well, the gospel tells us the evening before Jesus was condemned and crucified, he kept the Passover with his disciples. So it wasn't that the Passover happened afterwards. Jesus kept the Passover on that evening, and it would have been the beginning of the day. And he kept that Passover, and as our Passover lamb, he was crucified on Passover. Now, this is another reason why this has got to be all garbled, and another reason why we've got to make sure that we don't have Easter coinciding with the Passover all the time. Sometimes it kind of does, but for the most part, we go, it doesn't coincide. And that, I thoroughly believe, is one of Satan's things to hide the fact this should be one of our deepest, most cherished doctrines, teachings, that Jesus is my Passover. He's your Passover. He's everybody's Passover. He's the Passover. But I mean, from earliest days, it's almost like you're taught, well, that was the Jews' thing. And, Jesus, he came and he broke that. And so that's why we worship on Sunday. And you listen to all of this stuff, and there's no reason behind it. They just throw a bunch of words at you. And, it's a word salad covered with fetid cheese and thousands of lies. Anyway, he kept the Passover. We're not going to look at it. That means he was crucified and on Passover day, and the feast of unleavened bread in Leviticus 23, 5, and 6. We won't have to worry about turning over there. I'll just read it to you. 14th month of the first month at even is the Lord's Passover. The 14th. On the 15th day of the same month, that's not too difficult, 14 and 15. Come on, even I can do this. On the 14th is the Passover. On the 15th of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to Yahweh. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. This is why, by the way, that the Passover in some places is an 8-day festival. Okay? I believe it's in, this is terrible, my memory, but I believe it's in Israel that it's only a 7-day festival. But in the rest of the world, most of them do it as an 8-day festival. The first day of this feast is a holy convocation in which no customary work. Leviticus 23:7. On the first day of what? Feast of unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. What's going on? We've got the Passover. That wasn't said about the Passover, but the first day of unleavened bread, this is a high Sabbath. Okay? It's one in which you do not do any work. And so they're rushing around on Passover. Boy, Jewish Passover. I mean, store's going to be closing early. Spend time with your family, that kind of thing. But we see this is first of God's annual Sabbaths. This is a high day that was written about here. Again, Passover begins at sundown, ends the following day. Jesus kept the Passover, and the next day was the beginning of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and that day was a high Sabbath. So Passover was the day they're trying to get things. But when Jesus died, it was late in the day, and there wasn't time to get stuff done. You understand what I'm saying? And so they rush. They heard they put some stuff around him, and they take him into this tomb. And you go, okay, well, he'll keep there. I mean, hopefully nobody's going to be coming and hanging around dead bodies except for that poor guard that was stuck out there. And we've already talked about this thing, but the point, we're going to get into this and give you more. But here's the deal: the point is that Jesus was probably, again, we do not know it, we weren't there. And the evidence, I think, points strongly to this, but that he was crucified on a Wednesday, not on a Friday. Okay? We're going to talk about this, and if, I said this earlier, if it was in the year 31 AD, everything we're going to be talking about works out perfectly. And 31 AD, you're kind of going, well, that's pretty close to what we were told, about how long he lived. He was entombed, crucified, and entombed on a Wednesday afternoon. And, okay, turn to Mark, folks. This, again, somebody's been meditating somewhere along the way. Mark 16. This guy says, can we find further proof of this in the Gospels? Yes, indeed we can. Let's turn to seldom known detail, Mark 16:1. Now, when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices that they might come and anoint him. So that's what they're doing. They're coming to anoint him. But when? A Sabbath day is past. And you need to get this now. I'm telling you. He's crucified on Passover. And it's preparation day. What's the preparation day? For the high Sabbaths that's coming. And this high Sabbath is there, and so what do? Bible tells us actually that they rested on that day. And then they come back the next day, and they go to the tomb, and they brought the spices. Notice what it says in the first part of Mark 16:1. And it's just this little bink, and it goes right on by our Gentile minds. Now, when the Sabbath was past. Now stop everything. Stop, wait, whoa. If we go, okay, Sabbath has to be Saturday, you get it. But that is a little tiny thing. It's now when that Sabbath was past. Okay, so we go on. Turn to Luke, please. Luke chapter 23. Verse 55 and 56. The women who had come with Christ from Galilee followed afterward. They observed the tomb, saw his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils. They rested on Shabbat according to the commandment. This person says, do you see the problem here? Mark clearly says the women's bought spices. And here it is. Look at it again. I'm going to read to you from Mark. Now when the Sabbath was past, they bought the spices. I want you let's try to get this here. Okay. We'll go Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, etc. They bought spices after the Sabbath. So we've got a day in which with the Passover, and they were doing some preparation there, but then there was a Sabbath. That's why the Jews wanted his legs broken. So we got this high Sabbath, and it was after that they bought spices after this, okay, time-wise. And these things are important. The women had no time to buy the spices before the Sabbath, so they had to purchase them after the Sabbath. They bought the spices after the Sabbath and when the Sabbath was past. And again, Luke 22, 55 and 56, the women, come on, treat me right. The women who had come with Christ, I'm sorry, I already read that. They rested on the Sabbath according to commandment. Mark clearly states the women bought the spices after the Sabbath when the Sabbath was past. Luke tells us when the women prepared the spices, after which they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. What's the issue? We've got two Sabbaths. We've got a Sabbath here and Passover preparation day, and they were preparing it, and it was on that Passover, but they have that Sabbath, they bought spices, and then they rested after another Sabbath. See, and I'm sorry, it's there. It says these things. And, for a theologian just to say, they're wrong. And you go, okay, anyway, I don't get that kind of stuff. But they bought the spices after the Sabbath, then they prepared the spices before resting on the Sabbath. And it's a clear contradiction between these two gospel accounts unless two Sabbaths were involved. And again, I have just found, call me weird, whatever, that the Bible tends to be true when mankind and our denominations usually are not. When we understand there's two Sabbaths, the problem goes away. Mark tells us that after the high day Sabbath, which began Wednesday evening. Now, again, this person is making this assumption, but this is where it all fits. You have to make that assumption to make it work. Well, it may not be. So we don't know for sure. This is not something you go to beat somebody over the head. But the problem is that the way that we're taught doesn't work. And so I kind of like this one a little bit better. Here would have been the Passover where he was crucified. Okay? And it would have begun when? What now?
Did he eat the Passover with his disciples Tuesday night?
He eats Passover with his disciples what?
On Tuesday night?
No, it had been on Wednesday. Remember, they prepared the Passover, but when did the Passover start?
In the evening.
Wednesday night.
Yeah, they would slaughter at 3, and then at evening they would eat.
That's another one of the things where when Judas walks out the door and closes the door, what does John tell us? It was night. Why?
Passover.
Make sure that you knew this is Passover day. And this is what's going on. So he's the Passover, and it was, again, we have to wrap our head around that. It was the evening, okay? And then he would have been crucified the next day. In fact, all of the trials, at least the civil trials within the Jews hierarchy, all those were illegal. We talked about it earlier, but they were not supposed. You couldn't do that on the Passover. You couldn't do it at night either. You couldn't do it when it was dark. It was all illegal. Yes.
I guess I'm kind of confused. If he ate the Passover and it was on Wednesday, but he was also crucified on Wednesday, does that mean Tuesday night would have been the beginning of Wednesday Passover? Or, like, I guess it's not making sense in my mind. Like,
Well,
just we
okay.
think of it like dawn.
You don't. Okay. You got to do it Jewishly. Okay.
Yeah.
Throw out midnight. Okay. That doesn't happen here. The day starts when the sun goes down. Right there. That's not Tuesday night. For you, being a United States citizen, that's Tuesday night. Okay, but it's not Tuesday night. It's Wednesday day. Now it's Wednesday night. I get that, but the night came before the day, and we'll go Tuesday night till midnight, and then it's Wednesday morning. But the way that was counted, again, this is one of the important things about when you're looking at Scripture. You've got to this is one of my pet peeves, where someone will say, perfect example is Shamar or Tereo. Yes, we realize that the meaning originally was key, but it eventually has come to mean obey. And so there we are. No, you're talking to the wrong person altogether when you're pulling stuff like that, because that's the way they were communicating, and they were communicating between each other, and that's what it means. I don't get to change it 20 centuries later. I don't get to do that just because it's come to mean that. Yeah, it came to mean that, but it's not true. Okay, Mark tells us after the high day Sabbath, which began Wednesday evening and ended Thursday evening at sundown, the women bought the spices to anoint Jesus' body. Luke then tells us the women prepared the spices, activity which had taken place on Friday, and then they rested on the Sabbath day, which is the normal Sabbath. Okay, I'll put an N under here. This is normal. That's the normal Sabbath. And then on the first day of the week, okay, and suddenly everything is starting to work out now. We've got the time. Everything is right there, but you've got to understand that, and they're giving us all the information that you need when you look at it. Oh, my word, there's 2 Sabbaths that they're talking about there, and it to me, it's fairly clear. The first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread fell on Thursday, and again, this was 31 A.D. And in Matthew 28:1, at the end of the Sabbath, it began to dawn on the first day, came Mary Magdalene and others. This is King James, American King James, but it's 28:1. He says the word, that this is wild. Are you ready for this? Do you want, I'm about to knock it out of the park. Hang on, Tim. This is too cool. When Matthew writes, this is the American King James Version, but it's again taken out of the, and it's also the literal translation, Young's literal, if you've ever seen that one, Farrar Fenton's translation. And are you ready? When Matthew writes that the women went to the tomb, I'm sorry, this is just so cool. After the Sabbath, the word Sabbath here is plural. And it should be translated Sabbaths. Now I went, you've got to be kidding. And I looked it up and it's true. It's true. It is true. And Young's literal, the Marshall's interlinear, do it. It's there. In the Greek, it is Sabbaths with an S. I mean, this blows my mind. I mean, why can't we be told this? Well, I'd really kind of mess up Good Friday, don't you think? I mean, we can't.
We eat fish.
That's right. When we eat fish, we're gonna eat fish that day. This is pitiful. Anyway, when was Jesus resurrected? I'm sorry, Tim. You had your hand up, and I stomped on you. While you were
Okay,
trying
no,
to talk.
I was clarifying the confusion here. And I was thinking, okay, so Wednesday begins what we would call Tuesday evening.
Yes.
So like, let's say, so when the sun goes down, it's Saturday, even though we're like, oh, technically it's Friday.
Yeah.
So that's why it's saying is Wednesday begins what we would see as Tuesday evening. Does that make sense? That's what you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You again, you've got to think completely differently than the way we think, because the day we started at midnight, they didn't have those watches and things like that. So they started it as the Lord started it when he was doing creation. The evening and the morning were the first day, and the Jews picked up on that, and that's the way it worked. And so Wednesday he ate the Passover and then was killed, given as the Passover lamb on that day. Okay. And then we have this high Sabbath of unleavened bread starts there. Then we have Good Friday, and as Miss Davis has astutely pointed out, we are eating fish. It's where the ichthus sign came from, right? Yeah. So we got to throw this in here. We're making up our own mythology as we go along. Pretty soon, this thing's going to be. We're going to be known worldwide for this stuff. John 20 verse 1. Again, we see the first day of the week came Mary Magdalene early when it was yet dark, and the stone has been rolled away. And again, this person is pointing out, well, Mary came when the tomb was already empty. Jesus, as much as, and what else will this mess up? This is going to mess up sunrise services. Why? Because you go, well, and he's going to write, I'm sorry, he was already gone. He was already gone. As we have shown here, Jesus was entombed just before sundown here, and suddenly everything that we get. So we got the night, if you want to call it. He was entombed part of Wednesday, okay, but then Thursday when the sun goes down. So we got a night. So you got to say it backwards. You don't go a day and a night. It's a night and a day, okay, and then we got a night and a day here, and we got a night and a day here. Why? That's Shabbat. And now we come here and he's already gone. I mean, this is just, oh my goodness, that works out.
Now he could have rose when the sun went down Saturday.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, he sure could have. In any time in that time period, he could have.